You found the endless library, where every story is a doorway, and every week brings a new world to wander. These tales are crafted with care to ease anxious minds, spark quiet wonder, and offer a gentle companion in the dark. We release a new story each week, always soft, always slow, always a little magical. This week's journey, The Girl Who Woke the Moon. Chapter 1. The Town Without a Moon. There is a town tucked between the folds of two long-forgotten hills, where the houses lean gently toward one another like quiet companions, and the air always seems to carry the faintest scent of wood smoke and lavender. It is a town that moves at its own unhurried pace, where laundry flutters on lines like flags of calm, and cobblestones remember every footstep. But above this town, the sky has not known stars in many, many years, and the moon, once a companion to dreams and a keeper of night, has not risen in so long that most people have stopped expecting it altogether. No one speaks of it now, not out of fear or denial, but from the slow erosion of memory, as though the moon had once been a name everyone knew, and now it is a word only the wind recalls. Children are told stories, of course, tales passed down from mothers and grandmothers about constellations with names like whispered songs, of nights so bright you could walk the fields by moonlight alone, of silver arches stretching across rooftops and windowsills glowing pale blue. But those stories are told the way fairy tales are told, with a wistful smile and a faraway look, and no real belief that such things could still be true. But not everyone forgot. On the edge of town, in a small ivy-covered house with crooked shutters and a garden that blooms in defiance of the seasons, lives a girl named Lenora. She is not remarkable in the way storybooks suggest. She carries no amulets or enchanted maps. She doesn't speak to birds or hold keys to secret doors. But each night, when the lights in the town are low and the windows dim, Lenora climbs onto her rooftop. She brings with her a soft blanket, a mug of mint tea, and a leather-bound notebook filled with pages of almost poems and whispered thoughts. She spreads the blanket with care, settles in against the slope of the roof, and looks up at the sky that never changes. Then, in a voice no louder than a lullaby, she speaks. Not always in words, sometimes with humming, sometimes with breath, sometimes with silence that knows how to listen. She doesn't expect a reply. She doesn't imagine that anything listens. Still, she speaks. She speaks because something in her remembers, though not in detail. Lenora was barely 3 the last time the moon cast its light on the town, but a part of her carries the memory like a seed, a soft glow on her pillow, a quiet feeling on her skin, the gentle hush that once came with the moon's gaze. It's not a story she tells out loud. It lives in her bones, in her breath, in the way her hand lingers on the windowsill before bed. Each night she returns to the rooftop, not out of obligation, but out of longing, the kind that doesn't ask for answers, only presence. She hums old songs, she sketches stars she's never seen, and sometimes she closes her eyes and places a hand on her chest and whispers, "I remember you." The town continues its rhythm. The baker rises with the chill and fills the air with the smell of cardamom. The shopkeepers sweep their doorways and nod at one another with tired smiles. Children race between fences, never glancing at the sky. The world turns, gently but indifferently. But Lenora watches, and on one night, quiet, still, and unmarked by anything unusual, something shifts. The air feels heavier, but not with storm. It feels full, like the breath before a word. Lenora settles into her usual place on the roof, blanket tucked around her, tea warm between her hands. The sky above her is unchanged, the same thick twilight it always is. But in her chest, something stirs. She doesn't read a poem. She doesn't hum. She just lifts her gaze to the sky and says, I miss you. No wind stirs, no branches sway. Even the lanterns below seem to hold their flicker. Lenora lowers her eyes to her mug, then back up. Her voice is softer now. I know you're probably gone, but if you're still out there, I just wanted you to know. I remember, and I still believe. The silence that follows isn't empty. It wraps around her, warm and deep, like a blanket pulled over a sleeping child. For a moment, nothing moves. And then, a sound. So faint, it might not be a sound at all. A presence, a breath. The hush of something vast waking gently after a long, long rest. Lenora's eyes go wide. She leans forward without meaning to. And just above the edge of the hills, a shape begins to form. It's not bright, not even bold, just the faintest sliver of light, a thread of silver stitched across the dark. She stares, hardly breathing. It is the moon, not fully formed, not yet glowing, but there, present, real. She feels the tears welling in her eyes before she knows why. Something inside her tightens and softens and fills all at once. And in that moment she hears it, not a voice, not exactly, but a whisper without sound, a phrase made of memory and light that brushes the space beside her ear. Chapter 2. A Voice in the Sky. The moon did not speak again that night. After the whisper, soft and delicate, like a breath drawn across the surface of still water, Lenora stayed exactly where she was, wrapped in her blanket, hands cupped around her mug, eyes wide and unblinking. She waited for another flicker, another shift in the air, another sign that what she had felt was real. But nothing came, not the wind, not the stars, not the voice. Eventually the tea cooled in her palms and her breath quieted. Her eyelids grew heavy, her head nodded once, and then gently tipped to the side. When she woke, the sky was already lifting into morning, and the rooftops around her were golden edged in early light. She gathered her blankets slowly and crawled back through her window without a word. But she smiled, not because of what she had heard, but because she was no longer sure it had been silence. The day passed with its usual rhythm. Lenora folded laundry in the golden light that filtered through the kitchen windows. She watered the plants on the windowsill. She stopped briefly to watch a ladybug climb the spine of a spoon. Outside, the town carried on unchanged. The baker opened his shutters. A child dropped a coin into the wishing fountain. The school bell rang, and yet everything felt slightly shifted, as if something underneath had turned quietly while no one was watching. Lenora moved slowly through the hours, thinking of the sliver of light that had hovered over the hills the night before, the way it had curled just barely into view. She didn't tell anyone, she didn't write it down, but every so often her fingers brushed the edges of her mug a little longer. Her gaze lingered on the sky a little more. That night, she returned to the rooftop as she always did. Same blanket, fresh tea, the same breathless stillness wrapped around the eaves of the house, and the town below exhaled into sleep. But the air felt fuller, not louder, just more awake. She sat quietly for a while, letting the silence settle around her shoulders, and then she lifted her gaze. "I don't know if you can hear me tonight," she said, "but I think you did before. I hope you did." The words left her lips and drifted upward, soft as steam. Nothing answered. No sound came from the hills, but she kept going. "It's strange," she murmured, "how easily people forget something just because they can't see it anymore. The warmth of a hand you haven't held in years, a song you forgot you loved, a moon you thought might never return." She let the words fade, let the quiet return, but something in the stillness had changed. The air around her stirred faintly, lifting the ends of her hair. Then she saw it. Just above the ridge of the hills, a curve of light, barely there, not shining, just present, a silver thread no thicker than breath, resting on the edge of the world. Her eyes widened. She leaned forward. "Is that you?" she whispered, though the question no longer needed asking. The air trembled gently, not in sound, but in sensation, and then she felt it. A hum. Not like music, and not like voice. Like the low thrum of something remembering its shape. It passed through her, into her chest, down into her feet. It moved like a current through the night. Lenora sat frozen, her breath shallow as the hum grew softer and then became words. "I was asleep for a long time." The reply did not come from above or below. It was simply there, like light through closed eyelids. Lenora closed her eyes and whispered back, "Why?" A pause followed, one that stretched long and warm, like the pause between waves. "I faded," said the voice. "You remembered, you watched, you spoke." She looked out across the rooftops, all of them quiet, all of them glowing faintly in the dark. She wondered if anyone else had felt it, if anyone else had paused and noticed the shift in the air. "Did you feel lonely?" she asked softly. "Yes," said the moon, "but not the way you do. My loneliness is slower, quieter. I was still reflected in lakes, still noticed by shadows, but no one truly looked, not for a long, long time." Lenora thought about the stories she had been told, about the silver arcs and the constellation names. She thought of how none of the children in town ever looked up, how most of the adults no longer even mentioned the moon. "I don't think we meant to forget you," she said. "I believe you," the moon answered. But for a while, the world stopped needing wonder to survive, and I drifted. She swallowed gently, looking at the edge of the hills, now edged with light. "I think we're starting to remember again. I think some part of us still misses what we lost." "Yes," said the moon. "I can feel it. Little by little, breath by breath." Lenora unfolded her notebook and touched her pen to a clean page. She looked up, then down again. "What should I write?" she asked, almost playfully. "Write what you feel," said the voice. "That's not always easy," she replied. "It doesn't have to be easy, just honest." So she wrote. She wrote about the warmth of silence, about the feeling of being known, about how the sky had changed without changing, and how even the softest voice, when spoken with care, could wake something old and far away. She didn't worry about whether the words were good, she just let them be true. When she looked up again, the light above the hills had grown stronger. Not bright, not blazing, but steady. And somewhere between the rooftops and the stars, she heard the moon sigh. Not in weariness, but in peace. Chapter 3. The Dreamlight Path. That night, Lenora returned to the roof as usual, but something felt different in the quiet. The air had weight, as though the darkness itself was listening. The moon, now a silver crescent just shy of fullness, hovered higher than before, no longer shy, no longer hidden. Its glow reached the edges of chimneys, painted soft lines on her blanket, and shimmered faintly across the steam rising from her mouth. She didn't speak right away. She simply sat, letting the stillness surround her like a tide, letting her breath fall into rhythm with the hush of the night. Her notebook rested beside her, unopened. Her tea was warm in her hands. And for the first time, Lenora didn't feel like she had to call out. The moon was already watching. She felt herself soften, her muscles unwinding under the moon's gaze, her thoughts loosening at the edges. Her eyes grew heavy, but not with sleep, with stillness, a hush inside the hush. She blinked once, slowly. The rooftops blurred, the air shimmered, And then, without realizing how or when, she was no longer sitting at all. She was standing on a path of light, a narrow walkway that curved gently through a night sky landscape, its edges glowing faintly like the embers of stardust. The world around her had shifted. The town was gone, the roof was gone, only the path remained. Floating in space that felt impossibly vast and impossibly safe. Above her, a sky bloomed with stars she didn't recognize, constellations made of impossible shapes and soft arcs, slowly pulsing like breath. The path carried her gently forward. Each step was silent, each step felt chosen. All around her, the air moved with purpose, though no wind touched her skin. Lanterns hung from invisible threads, flickering with a light that didn't cast shadows. Trees shimmered with leaves like silver paper. Pools of glass reflected scenes she didn't remember living, but somehow recognized. A hand held in a forgotten dream, a room she'd never seen lit by a moon she couldn't. The deeper she walked, the more the path seemed to know her. It curved with her thoughts, widened when she felt curious, narrowed when she hesitated. She felt no fear, only wonder. And far ahead, rising like a mountain from mist, was a gentle light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. As she approached, the path opened into a clearing suspended in starlight. At its center stood a figure, not quite a person, not quite a shadow, bathed in the soft white glow of the moon. It stood still, hands at its sides, its presence quiet and immense. Lenora slowed, unsure if she should speak, but the figure turned, and though its face was hidden, she knew without question it was the moon itself. Not the shape in the sky, but the part that watched, that listened, that remembered. "You came," it said, not in sound, but in the space between thoughts. "I didn't know I could," she thought in return. "You always could. You just needed to walk far enough into the quiet." They stood together in the clearing, and above them the sky rippled gently, constellations shifting like pages turning in a book. Lenora wanted to ask so many things. Why her? Why now? What was this place? But the moon only offered stillness in response, and she found her questions slipping away like snow melting from a glove. Instead, she simply stood beside it, the two of them wrapped in silence more comforting than any answer. The moon gestured toward a pool of water in the clearing's center. Lenora stepped forward. In the water, she saw her own face, not the face she wore in waking life, but one shaped by dreams. Eyes wide with wonder, a small smile she hadn't noticed. Light threaded gently through her hair. She felt no surprise, only recognition. The moon spoke again, its presence folding softly around her. "This is the place where forgotten dreams come to rest, where the sky remembers those who watched, where silence keeps the stories no one tells." Lenora knelt at the edge of the water. She touched the surface with one finger. Ripples spread outward, and with them came images, people she didn't know speaking words she had once needed to hear. Stars being born with names she hadn't yet learned. Songs written in a language made of moonlight. She closed her eyes. The clearing grew brighter. The figure placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Not heavy, not cold, like the weight of a memory finding its way home. Time did not pass in this place. It drifted. It waited. It knew better than to rush. Lenora sat in the light beside the figure and let her thoughts slow. No more questions, no more waiting, just breath, just presence. Eventually she felt the path behind her begin to glow again. She turned. The moon gave a soft nod. "It is time to wake." She stood. The clearing faded into mist. The stars began to fold into themselves. The pool became glass. The air hummed one last time, low and warm, and then she was back, on the roof, the blanket still around her shoulders, the mug still full, faintly warm. The sky was unchanged, but she was not. The moon hung high above the hills, a little brighter than before. She didn't write anything that night. She didn't need to. She simply leaned back, looked up, and placed a hand over her heart. "I remember," she said silently, and the sky, though it made no sound, felt full of light. Chapter 4: The Moon's Memory. The next night came softly. No wind, no clouds, only the velvet hush of a world that had paused to listen. Lenora moved through the house in silence, as if loud footsteps might unsettle something delicate. She carried her blanket and tea through the window and onto the roof with a kind of reverence. The moon was brighter now, not yet full but clear and strong, its light laying gently across the shingles like a hand on a shoulder. She sat where she always did. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill her as the light grew more certain. She didn't expect another dream, or a voice, or anything in particular. She just wanted to be present. But something was different, not outside, but within her. A feeling that something long held in silence was beginning to stir. She looked up and let the silence stretch. Then, almost without thought, she whispered a question into the air. "Why did you go?" The moon did not answer immediately. Instead, the air shifted, soft, cool, and aware, and then the response came. Not as sound, but as memory, the kind that moves like fog, slow and quiet, curling into corners. The kind that doesn't announce itself but waits to be noticed. Images passed behind her eyes. A darkening sky, a rooftop, candles flickering in windows, then fewer candles, then none. The sky had grown quiet, not all at once, but little by little. And with it, so had the moon. "I wasn't pushed away," said the moon. "I was simply forgotten." Lenora felt the ache of that, the weight of it. She thought about how easily people let go of the things that once brought them wonder, how silence can settle so gradually that no one notices they've stopped singing. She thought of the stories children no longer asked to hear, of the drawings without stars, of the night windows closed too early. "I didn't want to leave," said the moon, "but no one looked anymore, so I dimmed. So I slept." She nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around her mug. "I think we all forgot something we didn't know how to name." There was a pause, not empty, but full of meaning. Then the moon shared something else, a memory, not of light or orbit, but of listening. "I remember when people used to speak to me," it said, "not with words alone, but with their stillness, with their breathing, with how they opened their hearts just by looking up. They told me their secrets, their wishes, their sorrow. And I held it all, gently, without needing to change it." Lenora felt something tighten in her throat. Not sadness, something deeper. Recognition. She knew that kind of holding, that kind of listening. And for the first time she wondered if the moon had been lonely not for sound, but for presence. She set her mug down carefully and placed a hand on the rooftop beside her. "I don't know if I ever told you anything worth holding," she said quietly, "but I've always hoped you could hear me anyway." "You spoke," the moon said. "That was enough." Lenora leaned back, letting her shoulders rest against the slope of the roof. The moon glowed above her, steady and calm. And then she asked the question she hadn't let herself ask before. "Will you stay this time?" A long silence followed. Then, "I will try." She understood that the moon, like anything sacred, could not be summoned or owned, only welcomed, only remembered. She opened her notebook and found a clean page. She didn't write a poem or a line of reflection. She didn't try to explain the conversation or capture the weight of what had been shared. She just wrote the date and then a single sentence. I listened, and it remembered me. That was all. She closed the book and rested her hand on its cover, feeling the warmth of the paper through the leather. The tea had gone cool, the town below was still, but the light above her had changed, not in brightness, but in presence. The moon was no longer a distant idea, it was here, awake and watching. She stayed on the roof until the first hints of dawn began to stretch across the sky. As the gray light grew, the moon began to soften, fading gently into the mist, like a dream that had finished its story. Leonora didn't feel the ache of loss this time, only a quiet fullness. She watched until the last edge of silver slipped behind the hills. Then she gathered her things. She stepped carefully back through the window, and before she closed the curtain, she looked once more at the brightening sky and whispered, "I'll be here again tomorrow." The silence, as always, held her words with care. Chapter 5. What the Town Remembered. The change came slowly, like mist curling through the edges of morning. The moon had returned, not fully, not loudly, but enough to shift something in the bones of the town. At first no one said anything. There were no declarations, no wide-eyed proclamations or pointing fingers in the street. But the silence had a new shape. People lingered a little longer by their windows at night. Candle flames danced a little higher, and some children, without being asked, began drawing curves in the corners of their papers, soft arcs that looked a little like moons, though none of them could say why. Leonora noticed it first in the way the shadows shifted, in the way the rooftops glowed just slightly when the air grew still. The moon was not just returning to the sky, it was returning to memory. One morning, she passed the bakery and saw the old baker, sleeves rolled high, humming a tune she hadn't heard since she was very small. It had no lyrics, just a rise and fall that felt like twilight. That same day, a neighbor who usually walked briskly and never made eye contact paused in her garden to look up, just for a second, before continuing on. The schoolteacher opened the curtains wider in her classroom. A man who never planted anything placed a small ceramic bowl on his windowsill and filled it with salt, water, and tiny white stones. None of these gestures were discussed. No one seemed even to realize they were doing them, but Leonora could feel it. The town was remembering, not with words, but with actions, with attention. She began to notice little offerings tucked into the quiet. A child left a smooth stone on the chapel steps. Someone stacked a pile of worn books on a bench outside the post office, each one carefully tied with twine. Someone else left a folded paper crane on the edge of the fountain. Leonora began to think of them not as random, but as fragments of recognition, as though the town had begun leaving gifts for something it hadn't quite named, as though some collective thread had been picked up again after years of silence. She wondered if they felt it too, that faint silver pull in the chest, that hush between breaths, that sense that something watching above might be watching back. She still returned to the rooftop every night. Some nights she spoke aloud, some nights she said nothing at all. The moon, now larger and softer in its glow, didn't always speak in return, but it was always there, and that was enough. Sometimes she simply sat and watched the windows of the houses below. She counted the flickering lights, noted which ones stayed on longer, which porches had new lanterns, which chimneys released thin streams of smoke that twisted like ribbons into the sky. These were not signs of magic. They were signs of awareness. People were remembering how to pause, how to look up, how to let stillness feel full. One evening, as she stepped outside, she saw chalk drawings trailing along the cobblestones. Not large, not detailed, just a trail of tiny moons, each one smaller than her palm, leading from the edge of her street toward the center of town. No one was around, but someone had left them. She followed them quietly, blanket tucked under one arm. The moons curved around a bend, passed beneath a bench, and ended at the foot of a lamppost where someone had drawn a single, closed eye. It wasn't eerie. It was gentle, like a note that said, "I see you too." Lenora smiled and continued on, wondering how many others had followed the same path earlier that day, wondering if anyone had added their own mark. The moon was higher that night, glowing softly, quietly proud. Lenora settled onto the roof and looked up, not to ask, not to wonder, just to be. She felt a quiet connection stretch from where she sat to every windowsill, every garden path, every sidewalk chalked with hope. The town hadn't changed, not in the way stories often promise. The people were still the same, but something deeper had opened, not because the moon had demanded it, but because it had been missed. And now that it was being seen again, it had begun to offer something back. Something that didn't need to be named to be understood. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line. "The sky glows differently when someone is watching." Then she closed it, setting it gently beside her, and leaned back with her hands behind her head. The breeze moved slowly across the roof, lifting a corner of her blanket. The tea in her mug had cooled, but she didn't mind. The quiet wrapped around her like a companion. Below, someone closed a door softly. Farther off, someone laughed, then caught themselves, as though the sound might startle something sacred. Lenora smiled. The town was remembering, not all at once, but in quiet moments stitched together by moonlight. That night, when she finally climbed back through her window, she left the curtain open. She crawled beneath her blanket, rested her notebook on her chest, and let her eyes close slowly. The light from the moon streamed gently through the glass, brushing her floor with silver. And for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep not thinking of what was missing, but feeling surrounded by what had returned. Chapter 6: A Thread Between Worlds. The nights grew longer, not by the clock, but by feeling. The kind of long that unfolds inward, like a stretch of thought rather than a measure of time. Lenora noticed it first in how the air lingered just a little longer after dusk, how shadows deepened not with fear, but with softness. The moon, nearly full now, drifted higher with each passing night, casting silver across the rooftops like silk unraveling from the sky. Lenora's visits to the roof had become more than ritual. They were communion, the place she felt most like herself. Or maybe more than herself, like part of something old, something wide, something waking slowly from sleep. On one of those nights, she returned to the dream path. She didn't mean to. One blink and the roof was gone. The world folded inward and outward, and suddenly she stood once more on the silver trail that curved into impossible sky. This time, the stars above pulsed brighter, and the air shimmered with a deeper hum. The light was softer than before, but richer, as though it carried stories in its particles. She followed the path without hesitation. It knew her now, bent gently where she leaned, offered pauses where she needed them. She passed a garden of wind chimes, their sound like falling feathers, a pool that reflected only the future. A book that opened and turned pages on its own, but never showed her the words. She smiled as she walked. This was a place built not for knowing, but for being. At the edge of the clearing, the moon waited in its old form, part shadow, part figure, part presence. It nodded once, and Lenora stepped forward without speaking. They stood side by side for a while, looking out at the dream sky as it moved in slow, sweeping spirals. The moon began to speak, not in language, but in impressions. Memories that weren't hers but felt familiar. A field of lanterns lit by hope, a cave where someone once waited lifetimes for forgiveness. A room full of windows, each holding a version of night. She didn't try to understand it all, she just let it move through her, the way wind moves through tall grass, the way music hums in your bones. Then the moon turned to her, and the message came clearer. You are not the only one. Lenora's breath caught. She looked at the sky, then down at the path, then back at the figure beside her. Not the only one to dream, not the only one to speak, not the only one who remembered. All across the world there were others. Not many, but enough. Children tracing stars in steam-fogged windows, elders lighting candles without quite knowing why, dreamers who had never stopped looking up. Each one had begun to stir, and the moon, still waking, had begun to gather their quiet voices like threads, thin and trembling, but golden with meaning. She saw them then, not faces, not bodies, but flickers, echoes, tiny sparks across the dream sky, each one a soul listening, wondering, remembering. The moon was not only waking, it was weaving, across rooftops and oceans and forests and cities, a tapestry of attention, a quiet chorus. Lenora felt herself fold into it, not apart from it, but as one voice among many. The dream path beneath her pulsed gently in rhythm with her heart. She knelt at its edge and placed her hand to the ground. I see them, she thought. I feel them too. The moon didn't reply with words, only warmth, a kind of joy that didn't rise or shine. It settled. When she woke, the moon outside her window was nearly full. The silver light spilled across her floor like memory. She lay still for a long time, notebook resting beside her, too full to write. But eventually she sat up, opened the book, and slowly began to draw. Not the dream path, not the figure, just lines, soft, arching curves, like vines, like threads, connecting point to point. Some bright, some quiet, the barely visible. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew they were true. She finished as the sky began to fade into dawn, then closed the notebook and placed it by the window, where the moonlight could reach it. That morning, as she stepped into the street, she noticed something new. A string of paper stars stretched across a garden fence. A painted moonstone resting on a tree stump, a single candle in a window, burning long after sunrise. She smiled and kept walking. Chapter 7. The Night That Sang. It began like any other night, the soft rustle of curtains as Lenora opened the window, the hush of the house settling beneath her, the warm weight of the blanket gathered under one arm, and the steam of tea rising into the early dark. The moon hung high and full now, its light brushing the rooftops in wide silver strokes. It felt less like an arrival and more like a presence returned to its rightful place. Calm, unannounced and unmistakable. Lenora stepped onto the roof and stood still for a moment before sitting. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air held a hush that seemed to listen on its own. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime stirred, and below, the streets shimmered as if the moonlight had reached into the stones. She didn't know what she was waiting for, only that something was near. Not dramatic, not sudden, but near. The kind of nearness that brushes just behind the heart. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, sipping slowly, watching the sky. And then, from the farthest corners of the dark, a sound began to rise, soft at first, a low hum, almost like breath. It wasn't music, not exactly, but it moved like melody. It rippled through the rooftops, curled along the chimneys, and echoed in the spaces between things. She tilted her head, eyes wide. The sound didn't come from above or below, it came from everywhere. From the moon, from the sky, from the hearts of those who had remembered. The town held its breath. Candles flickered higher, leaves on branches barely moved, and the hum deepened into song. No words, just tones that felt older than stone, layers of sound that folded like wings. The moon was singing, or perhaps it had never stopped, and the world had simply learned how to hear again. Lenora felt it in her spine, her palms, the soles of her feet. It was not a performance, it was a reunion. The song was not for her alone, it was for all who had listened, for all who had paused in the dark with open hearts, for the children with chalk on their fingers, for the elders who whispered old tales by candlelight, for the ones who had lit lanterns and left gifts on stone benches without knowing why. The song was for them. It was them. Lenora closed her eyes. She let the sound wrap around her like a blanket warmed by memory. Images passed behind her lids, not dreams, but echoes. A hand held, a laugh shared, a breath caught at the edge of wonder. She saw the town not as it was, but as it had always been, glowing with small hopes, threaded with kindness. The song grew brighter, not louder, and for a moment, she felt the boundary between her and everything else soften. She wasn't just sitting on a rooftop. She was part of the sky, part of the hush, part of the song. And then, as gently as it had begun, the music began to fade. Not into silence, but into stillness, the kind that holds the shape of the sound that came before. Lenora opened her eyes. The moon remained luminous and calm. She looked across the rooftops and saw windows open, lights on, people sitting at the edges of their beds or leaning out into the night, not speaking, just listening. Below, someone placed a hand over their chest. Another held a candle just a little closer to the glass. All of them hearing the same thing in the quiet that followed. All of them remembering. She opened her notebook one last time. This time, she didn't write. She simply tore out the last page she had filled, lines curved and looped and trailing like thread, and folded it into a small square. She placed it on the roof beside her mug, a gift, a gesture, not to be taken, but to be witnessed. The moon did not move, but its light shifted slightly, touching the paper just enough to make it glow. Lenora leaned back, her heart full, her breath slow, her eyes reflecting silver. And when she finally climbed back through the window, she didn't close the curtain. She left it open, just enough, so the moon could watch her sleep. And the town, wrapped in its glow, slept with her, all of them held in the quiet song of a night that had remembered how to sing. Chapter 8. The Moon Watches Back. Seasons changed, though not all at once. Spring unfolded in slow, mossy hushes. Rain came and went with the softness of thought. Lenora watched it all from the rooftop, her blanket now worn at the corners, her tea sometimes replaced with cool water steeped in lemon and herbs. The moon no longer needed coaxing to rise. It came each night with ease, a companion rather than a miracle, sometimes full, sometimes barely there, but always watching. She no longer waited for its return. Now, she greeted it. Not out of habit, but out of something deeper. Something like belonging. The town had changed, too, in ways that would be hard to measure from the outside. The rhythm of life still beat softly. Bread still baked, doors still opened and shut, children still ran too fast for their own feet. But the silence between things had grown meaningful. Candles were now lit not just for light, but for memory. Paper stars and folded notes found their way into flower pots, left on windowsills, tucked beneath smooth stones. No one needed to speak about the moon's return. It was understood, like the way people began walking more slowly at night, or how they looked up, sometimes, and smiled without knowing why. Lenora still kept her notebook, though it had grown heavier with time, filled with sketches and single-sentence reflections, with lines that curled like tendrils and dots like constellations. She wrote less about longing and more about noticing, about the cat that blinked at the moon as if in conversation, about the way wind moved through pine branches when the sky was clear, about the hollow sound of a porch step and how it echoed like a drum if you walked just right. The moon had taught her not just to remember, but to witness, to gather moments the way some people gather feathers or stones, carefully, with reverence. One night, a letter appeared on her rooftop, folded twice. No name, no seal. She found it tucked beside her mug, its paper cool with dew. She opened it and read only this: "I see it too." That was all. No explanation, no signature, but her heart lifted, not with surprise, but with recognition. She wasn't alone. Someone else had been watching, listening, dreaming. Someone else had followed the silver thread back to the beginning. She folded the letter and placed it in her notebook, between 2 pages filled with drawn spirals. Then she looked up and whispered, "Thank you," not to the sky, but to whoever had written it. And the moon, as if acknowledging the exchange, brightened just slightly in reply. The dream path came less often now. Not gone, just less necessary. The connection between her and the moon no longer required sleep. It had settled into her days, into her steps, into the way she touched the doorknob before leaving the house, or paused at the gate to feel the light on her cheek. She no longer needed proof. The magic was not in the extraordinary, it was in the ordinary, softened. The moon was not a stranger now. It was a neighbor, a friend, a keeper of old songs and soft endings. Some nights, she still returned to the rooftop, not always with tea, sometimes just with silence, and on those nights, she didn't always speak. She simply sat. Let the quiet fill her. Let the light rest on her shoulders like a shawl. Below, the town slept. Above, the moon moved gently across the sky. She thought of all the other rooftops in all the other places, of other people looking up, quietly remembering, quietly returning. And the thought made her feel both very small and very known, like a single note in a long, unbroken song. She closed her eyes. The breeze moved around her. Her breath slowed, and for a moment she felt the moon looking back. Not with eyes, but with presence. And she smiled. Because in that moment, she wasn't remembering the moon. The moon was remembering her. Chapter 9. The Light We Carry. The moon never truly left again. It waxed and waned as moons do, but its presence was steady, like a breath, like a tide, like something remembered too deeply to forget again. The town settled into a new kind of rhythm, not faster, not louder, just more awake. Children grew up drawing moons in the corners of their books. Neighbors paused to light candles for no reason at all, and Lenora, now a little older, still walked the garden path each evening with her notebook tucked under her arm and her heart wide open to the night. The town had not become magical in the way of legends. It had simply learned how to see what was already there. There were nights when the sky was clouded, when the moon's glow was hidden behind soft veils of mist. But even then, the people still looked up, not out of habit, out of trust, because they knew it was still there, because they'd once seen it return when no one thought it would. That knowing changed them, quietly, profoundly, and in 100 little ways the town became a place of remembering. Not just the moon, but each other. Lenora noticed it in small acts: a window left open to share a song, a lantern lit at the crossroads just because, a stranger waving from across the square with no reason other than joy. Light called to light. Lenora no longer needed the rooftop every night. Her life had grown fuller, not busier, just deeper. She spent her mornings writing at the kitchen table, the windows wide to the breeze. She spent her afternoons walking the hills beyond the town, collecting smooth stones and placing them on old stumps, one by one. But every now and then she would wake after midnight with the feeling that something was listening, not urgently, not impatiently, just waiting. She would rise, wrap her shawl around her shoulders, and step outside barefoot, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath her. The moon would be there, often behind clouds, sometimes crystal clear, always watching, and she would nod, softly, as if to say, "I know, I feel it too." On the night of the longest moon, the town gathered. No one planned it, no flyers were hung, no speeches written. But as dusk fell and the moon began its slow rise, the people stepped outside, one by one, in silence, carrying lanterns, carrying candles, carrying nothing at all but the hush inside their chests. They filled the streets with stillness, each person finding their own place. On steps, on benches, along fences and rooftop, no one spoke. They didn't need to. They simply sat and watched and let the light rest gently across their shoulders. Lenora stood at the center of it all, though no one pointed her out. She wasn't the cause, she was the continuation. She held a notebook in one hand, pressed to her chest, and in the other a single white candle. She didn't light it, she just held it. The moon, now high and wide above the town, seemed to pause in its arc, as if it too had stopped to listen. The moment held like a breath. And then something shifted, not loud, not grand, just a hum beneath the heart. As if every quiet word ever spoken into the night had gathered into a thread, and the thread had become a song. There were no fireworks, no miracles, just this. The feeling that the world had knit itself back together a little more, that every whispered longing, every remembered light had landed somewhere real. Lenora closed her eyes. She thought of the first time she had whispered to the sky, of the night she saw the moon begin to wake, of the dream path, the figure, the other voices, and of how all of it had led here, not to an ending, but to a stillness so full it no longer needed answers. She opened her eyes. The candle in her hand flickered once, though no wind touched it. She smiled, and in that moment, she knew. The moon no longer needed to be spoken to in order to stay. It stayed because it was seen. It stayed because it had been welcomed back. Not as myth, not as symbol, but as presence, as kin. And the town would go on. Seasons would shift, children would grow, windows would open and close, but something had been restored, something silent, something sacred. Lenora looked up one last time that night. She whispered nothing. She just breathed, and the moon, full and quiet above her, breathed back. Chapter 10. What Lingers in the Quiet. Years passed, though Lenora didn't measure them in numbers. She measured them in full moons, in how often the jasmine bloomed, in the way the wind shifted at the turn of each season. Life moved gently forward. Children grew tall. Elders grew slower. Trees leaned deeper into their roots. The town did not forget the moon again, but it no longer needed to name it aloud. Its presence had folded into everything, a shimmer in the puddles after rain, a hush before the first snow, a softness in the way people paused to listen. Wonder had become quiet habit, reverence without ceremony. Lenora too had changed, not in any way dramatic, but her gaze carried depth, her steps moved with care, and her voice, when she spoke, held the weight of having listened deeply for a long time. She still wrote, though less often. The notebooks had grown thick on her shelf, some filled with drawings, others with fragments of thought, small things collected like shells from a shore. She didn't try to organize them. She let them live as they were, scattered, beautiful, unfinished. The moon had taught her that not every story needed to be tied closed. Some were meant to drift, to hum just beneath the surface. On some evenings, she would open a page at random, read a line she barely remembered writing, and close the cover again, smiling to herself, not because the words were profound, but because they were true in the moment she had written them. And that was enough. One morning, just before dawn, she woke with a feeling in her chest, like a thread had been tugged lightly from very far away. Not urgent, not loud, just a nudge. She stepped onto the roof, still in her nightclothes, the sky above her just beginning to turn. The moon hovered low, silver and slow, about to set. And as she stood there, hand resting on the chimney for balance, she whispered not a wish or a thought, but a thank you. Thank you for returning. Thank you for staying. Thank you for remembering. She didn't expect a reply. She didn't need one. The light on her face was enough. Later that year, a young girl moved into the house across the lane. She was small and quiet and often wore a red scarf even when it wasn't cold. Lenora saw her one evening, sitting on her porch step, a pencil in hand, drawing something on the back of a grocery list. The girl looked up and caught Lenora watching. She smiled shyly, then without saying anything turned her paper around to show her. It was a sketch of the moon, full, soft, and impossibly kind. Lenora smiled back and nodded once. That night, as the moon rose, she didn't go to the roof. She didn't need to. She knew someone else was already looking up. Seasons continued to turn. The world changed in small, invisible ways. But above it all, the moon moved as it always had, waxing, waning, steady, not because it was owed attention, but because now it moved within it. The memory of being seen had stayed with it, and every rooftop, every window, every quiet breath beneath the stars added to that memory. Lenora grew older, her steps slower, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes never lost their upward tilt. And the moon, whenever it passed over her home, always lingered just a little longer, laying its light across her garden like a letter never needing to be opened. One last time, on a night when the air was warm and the world was quiet, Lenora walked the path behind her house. The moon was full, resting just above the tree line. She reached the edge of the hill, turned her face to the sky, and stood very still. No blanket, no tea, no notebook, just her and the hush. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everything she had ever said, the moon already carried. Everything she had ever wondered, it already knew. She closed her eyes, breathed in, and smiled. The light touched her gently. And far above, wrapped in the sky it never left again, the moon smiled too.